Well, thank you. How are you? I'm currently employed at the office of the Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney.
In what capacity are you employed there?
I'm a deputy district attorney
How long have you served the Fulton County District Attorney's Office as a deputy district attorney?
since June 21st, 2011.
And when did you first begin with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office?
June 21st, 2011.
What area do you work in the district attorney's office?
I am the head of the unindicted homicide unit. I review all of the murder cases that come, well, not just murder, all homicide cases that come into the office from the various police agencies in the county.
And you made the distinction between murders and homicides. Why is that?
Well, it's not just murder. There's felony murder. There's involuntary manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, homicide by vehicle in the first degree, etc.
Have you always served as the head of the unindicted homicide unit?
No.
Before serving as the head of the unindicted homicide unit, what did you do within the district attorney's office?
For approximately the first 3 months of my employment in the DA's office, I was assigned to what was called at the time the complaint room, which was a 24-hour operation in which I would receive or be assigned cases that were coming in live. Essentially, somebody had just been arrested and the police would send a report. I would review it, speak with the officer, draft some sort of affidavit to summarize the case, and otherwise ready the case for first appearance the following morning. Following that, I was assigned to the non-complex division. I was in that division for 3 to 6 months. Sounds about right. That involved the prosecution of cases that were deemed non-complex, such as possession of cocaine and theft by taking under a certain value. After my time in the non-complex division, I was assigned to the complex trial division for about a little less than 2 years, signed to Judge Schwall's courtroom and then Judge Constance Russell's courtroom. And then in October of 2013, I was assigned to the unindicted homicide unit, albeit I was not the head of the unindicted homicide unit, though. If memory serves correctly, I was the only attorney in the unit, so I suppose in a way I was the head, given that I was the only one. But then as time went on, the unit expanded. I was promoted, and now there's more employees in the unit. And now I'm the deputy in charge of it.
Within the homicide of the district attorney's office, do you receive cases involving homicides where persons are charged or already arrested?
Yes.
And is it always the case that a person has been charged or arrested when you receive a file within the office?
No.
When you do receive a file wherein a person has been arrested, do you immediately present that case to the grand jury?
No.
Why is that?
Well, I want to ensure that the person who's been charged or arrested primarily committed the crime that is alleged they committed. So in order to do that, I inspect the case file, which primarily, if not, well, I don't want to say exclusively, because there are some things that I find on my own, but when I'm preliminarily looking at a case file, I look at what the police have sent me, their reports, their interviews, cell phone records, the extractions of cell phones, when the police actually copy the data out of somebody's cell phone. And I just go over all of this to make sure it's consistent with what has been alleged in the arrest warrants.
And you always have all of the information within the case file that you feel you need in order to fully complete the investigation on the homicide.
No, not always. No.
And what types of steps do you take to ensure that you have obtained as much information as you can? For instance, do you pull jail calls?
Yes.
Do you speak with witnesses?
I do, on occasion, yes.
Judge, Your Honor, meeting.
Your Honor.
It's a preliminary matter. It's a preliminary matter. I'll allow it. Over the objection.
Do you go to scenes?
Yes.
Search warrants?
Yes.
Do you present evidence to other entities for further testing?
Yes.
And does that always take limited amounts of time, or is that sometimes more protracted?
Well, it depends on the case and the volume of deficiencies that I have identified in the initial investigation.
Bringing you to the case involving the murder of Donovan Thomas. Do you recall when you received that case file within the district attorney's office?
Would have been late, probably December 2015, January of 2016, somewhere around there. It's actually probably going to be January of 2016 to be more exact.
And without going into specifics about what that was, at the time that you received that case file, was it complete to your satisfaction as an assistant district attorney?
Well, it depends on how you define the word complete. Was it complete insofar as the Atlanta Police Department was concerned? I don't know. I know that they handed me everything that I asked for. If there were some other documents that the Detective Thorpe still had in his file, they just didn't give to me. I have no way of knowing that. As far as I know, what the Atlanta Police Department gave me was the complete case file.
And did you review that complete case file that you received from the Atlanta Police Department?
I did.
Upon reviewing that case file, were you satisfied that the case was sufficient to present to the grand jury as you received it at that time?
No.
Did you take additional steps to investigate the case?
Yes.
Now, at the time, a person had been arrested on the murder, is that correct?
Yeah, at least one person had been arrested on the murder.
And that person was the defendant, Shannon Stillwell?
Yes.
Jackson?
Yes.
From what you were able to gather from the file that Detective Thorpe gave you and from your subsequent investigation of the case that you did, was Mr. Stillwell the only person of interest in that case? Was he the only alleged participant in the homicide?
Well, no, there were three other. If we're talking about the people that had been charged by the police, there were four.
Okay, go ahead.
There was Antonio Sledge, Demikian Garlington, Kenneth Copeland, and Shannon Jackson, a.k.a. Shannon Stillwell. Those were the four people that the police charged for the murder of Donovan Thomas in late 2015.
And were you able to determine, based on your review of the file given to you by Detective Thorpe, what primarily those arrests were based on?
They were primarily based on the statement of a young man named Spencer Wright.
All right. And when you received the file from Detective Thorpe, did you endeavor to speak with Spencer Wright yourself?
I did.
Why is that?
Well, so Spencer Wright, according to his statement, he witnessed the homicide, the drive-by shooting, as he stood at a bus stop on McDaniel Street across the street from the barber shop, parking lot of which Mr. Donovan Thomas stood when he suffered his fatal gunshot wounds. There was a surveillance camera mounted on that barber shop, and the bus stop where Mr. Wright said he stood was in the viewing area of that surveillance camera. And when I looked at the footage, I didn't see anyone standing at the bus stop. I saw a cat at one point milling about the bench at the bus stop, and I only bring that up to indicate that the clarity was sufficient to tell if there was a human being standing there. There was no human being standing there. So what I wanted to do was speak with Mr. Wright, show him. I believe I printed off some still images. I don't think I brought in a computer or something to show him the actual footage. So I wanted to speak with Mr. Wright and make sure. First thing I did is I wanted to speak with him and make sure that I was clear as to where he was standing. So I actually, before I confronted him with the fact I didn't see him on the video, I had some printouts from Google Earth, and I asked him to point to the specific bus stop where he said he was standing. And when he did, he pointed to the bus stop that was depicted on the surveillance footage, at which point I said, but there's nobody standing at that bus stop. And he didn't really have an explanation for me.
Did you receive that surveillance footage from the Atlanta Police Department?
Yeah, yes.
Did you, as you stated, you pulled Google Earth images. Was that something that you had received from the Atlanta Police Department, or is that something that you did to further your investigation?
That was something I did to aid in my interview with Mr. Wright. I just pulled up Google Earth and took screenshots of the bus stop and the general area where the homicide occurred so he could point to them and indicate where he stood, where he claimed to have been standing, I should say.
And why did it concern you that he was not shown in the surveillance footage that you presented to him, yet he claimed to have witnessed the homicide?
Well, he claimed that the bus stop was his vantage point from which he witnessed the four defendants that I mentioned earlier occupying a vehicle and commit the drive-by shooting. If he wasn't standing at the bus stop, that would suggest he didn't witness it at all.
Was there anything else that you were able to uncover during your ensuing investigation of this case that enlighten you more as to whether or not Mr. Wright was presenting you information that was factually accurate?
Yes. So after my interview with him, I requested from the Atlanta City Jail, because that's where he was when I interviewed him. I interviewed him inside the Atlanta City Jail. He was an inmate there. From somebody that worked at the Atlanta City Jail, whose name I don't recall. But I asked him to send me Mr. Wright's recorded jail calls, because just like the Fulton County Jail, at least at that time, the phone calls placed by inmates from the Atlanta City Jail were recorded. So when I obtained Mr. Wright's jail calls, I found one that was he placed shortly after his arrest to a gentleman. And during this call, and this is, by the way, not verbatim. Okay, I'm not quoting him exactly, but he told his friend about his recent arrest, which I believe was on a probation violation, and he said that everything would be okay because he was helping the police solve a murder. And his friend asked, "Well, what murder was that?" He said Nuts murder, and that Nut would be the moniker for Donovan Thomas. And his friend scoffed at him and said, "But you didn't witness that." And Mr. Wright responded, he basically shushed him, reminding him that they were on a recorded jail line. But and the implication there was that he didn't witness it. And he would prefer that his friend not, utter such a thing on a recorded jail phone. And then he said, but it's something to the effect of, it doesn't matter. We all know what happened anyway. And it's also worth mentioning that during my interview with Mr. Wright, very soon into the interview, something that caught my attention was, he said, "You see, I've been on Instagram," or so, again, not verbatim, but he mentioned that he had been on Instagram and putting the pieces together from there, which put up a red flag, made me think that perhaps he was just compiling his statement through rumors that he saw on the internet. So after I heard that jail call, I asked investigator David White. I knew who he was talking to. I can't recall his name off the top of my head, but the gentleman that he was talking to, and the same gentleman that said, "But you didn't witness that," etc. So my investigator reached out to him and asked him, "Well, how did you know that Mr. Wright didn't witness the murder of Donovan Thomas?" And he said, "Well, that murder was a really big deal in the city, and I'm pretty close with Mr. Wright, and he never mentioned to me that he had witnessed it. It's the kind of thing that he would have mentioned had he witnessed it." So at that point, I was satisfied that Mr. Wright didn't really witness the murder at all, and he just made it up.
Why didn't you just go ahead and present the information to the grand jury as had been presented to you by the Atlanta Police Department? People had been arrested. Is it an appearance that you immediately get the case indicted?
Who's made the objection? I sustain as to form. You can rephrase it. You can rephrase it.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Sprinkle, is there any reason in particular why you did not go ahead and present the indictment to the grand jury with the names and the information that had been given to you from the police department?
Well, for one thing, I'm not the one who decides what cases are presented to the grand jury, but if I was, I still wouldn't, because at that point, out of 3 of the 4 defendants, I had a complete absence of evidence that they committed the murder at all, and I wouldn't present a case naming a specific individual. I wouldn't present an indictment to a grand jury wherein a specific individual is alleged to have committed crime when there's a total absence of evidence they actually committed the crime. That would actually violate state bar rules for me to do that.
And Your Honor, if the court would, just so that I'm aware, is there any other party to this defendant Stillwell's motion to dismiss that I'm unaware of?
I have not. The court is unaware of anybody else who's joined in this particular issue. Okay.
I'd like to ask that, Dorsey. The state keeps saying that because this is RICO, everything applies to everything. I have adopted the motions of everybody, so I do reserve the right to ask some questions of the witness, Your Honor. But based on the theory that the state says that because it's RICO, everything applies to my client, I want to make it very clear. I don't have nothing to do with this.
Your Honor, this is Shannon Stillwell's assertion of his constitutional right to a speedy trial. I do not believe that Mr. Chada or his client had any right to assert as it relates to Shannon Stillwell's assertion of his right or the denial thereof to a trial. I would ask that the courts limit questioning and argument and commentary to the parties that are involved in this particular motion.
Your Honor, as it relates to Mr. Mark Quake, he has nothing to do with it as well in terms of the specifics of a murder. However, he's a part of this indictment.
Yeah, well, the issue you're going to have is that since it's a RICO case and anything can be attributed to any other defendant, that's why that they have a right of confrontation as to this. Now, the specific relief is only available to Mr. Stillwell, but counsel are entitled to ask other questions as they see fit.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Your Honor, if I may, just to be clear, on Mr. Williams' behalf, we do claim an interest in the outcome and the argument of this motion. We understand it's Mr. Stillwell's motion, but again, as the court has indicated, because this is a RICO indictment, Mr. Williams is charged in it. He has an interest and an ability to pose objections if necessary.
Deputy Sprinkle, after you determined that the information that you had been given was inaccurate or could not be verified, did you take additional steps to investigate the homicide, the murder of Donovan Thomas?
I did.
And would you tell the court whether or not this was a sort of high-profile case within the office?
It was.
And are you able to say what impact the case itself had on the office or on the city of Atlanta that caused it to be a high-profile case?
Basis.
Really? What does high-profile case have to do with anything?
All right.
I'll respond to that.
Why don't you explain that for our rule?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor, the reason that I asked about it being a high-profile case is to sort of lay the groundwork for the fact that the office did not seek to not investigate or to not make sure that we got the case right. By asking whether it was a high-profile case, it's to bring out to the court the mindset with which Deputy Sprinkle investigated the case.
Okay, I'm going to overrule your objection. Go ahead.
I just want to
Thank you, Your Honor.
be clear.
I've overruled your objection.
Did that murder carry with it a series of violent shootings within the city of Atlanta?
Yes, for many years following that.
Basis. Why don't you rephrase?
I can do that. Thank you, Judge. After the murder of Donovan Thomas, were there multiple shootings within the city of Atlanta within days, sometimes weeks of one another?
Objection, relevance.
I have
There's multiple shootings
basis.
going on in the case.
I'm going to overrule. Let her finish, okay? And then I'll okay? All right, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Judge. Were there multiple shootings within the city of Atlanta?
Yeah.
Objection on the relevance.
I was going to say this to Leedy. Why don't you ask him what happened as a result of that, if he knows, if any?
The murder of Donovan Thomas, and let me back up. Were there any gang implications to the investigation? In other words, during your investigation and during your initial review of the file, was there any indication from the information that you had within the file that the murder was gang-related?
Yes.
And what gangs were alleged to have been involved?
Inglewood family, that was the gang to which Mr. Donovan Thomas was a member, a high-ranking member, and the other gang was YSL, or Young Slime Life, to which Mr. Williams was a member.
Did you gain knowledge?
I'm going to object to that
Basis.
answer.
Basis.
Speculation, and after to be stricken.
I'm going to overrule the objection. What's your objection?
it's a legal conclusion. Criminal street gang is a legally defined term as to be determined by 12 people from the city from.
That may be in front of a jury, but this is the district attorney's investigation. I'm going to overrule your objection.
In your honor, so just so I'm clear, we are speaking just in layman's terms when we say gang at this moment, not in legal terms.
I'm still going to overrule your objection, okay? Thank you.
And during the weeks and months following Donovan Thomas's murder, did you have information that led you to believe that a series of retaliatory shootings between YSL and Inglewood family took place across the city of Atlanta?
I'm going to object because it calls for hearsay.
Your Honor,
Go ahead.
Your Honor, the defendant, Shannon Stillwell, has alleged an intentional delay on the part of the state. What led us to further our investigation and what information we had?
Goes to conduct?
Yes.
All right, I must overrule the objection.
Thanks, Your Honor.
Okay.
Did you have information that led you to believe that a series of retaliatory shootings between YSL and Inglewood family happened after Donovan Thomas was murdered?
Yes, there were cases where the victims were identified as YSL or Englewood family, and the shooters were also identified as YSL or Englewood family. And commonly, the shooters would generally be in the rival gang. I don't want to say there were no cases that involved the same members of the same gang shooting at each other, but primarily it was opposing gangs that were shooting at each other. The participants that were identified were in opposing gangs. Those two gangs specifically, yes.
And during that time, did you and the Fulton County District Attorney's Office gang unit work closely with the Atlanta Police Department in an effort to solve the murder of Donovan Thomas, as well as find out whether or not those series of shootings were related, in fact, to the murder of Donovan?
The gang unit, the office's gang unit, I believe they were in consultation with Detective Thorpe, but I don't recall speaking with Detective Thorpe prior to him obtaining warrants for the arrest of the four men that he originally charged.
And that is before the arrest of the persons that were originally charged. I'm speaking of during the months in the year 2015, 2016. Did you obtain more information that led you to believe that the murder of Donovan Thomas was gang-related?
Right. Well, yeah, I would routinely consult with Detective Tyrone Dennis with the Atlanta Police Department. He also worked very, very closely on the murder case and, alongside Detective Jim Thorpe Jr.
And were there incidents, shooting incidents that took place, and other incidents that took place that involved members of the alleged offending gang or YSL?
Yes, either, as I said, the victim was identified as being in one gang or the other. The shooters are identified as being in the opposite gang. There were shell casings that, when placed under microscopes and the tool mark on the back of the casing was compared to various incidents, they would find that similar guns, or the same guns, I should say, were used in these various incidents, which could possibly indicate that the same participants were involved.
And did you prepare a supplemental report to the case file that you have been given by Detective Thorpe in order to outline the investigation that you conducted in this case between the time that you received it and November 13, 2018?
Yes.
I am showing to you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 1.
Yeah, Miss Love, we're going to just use the next exhibit in order. So what's that, Miss Rosenwasser?
11. Would the court like for me to then label it State's Exhibit?
States 11. Yes, ma'am. If you wouldn't mind, please.
I'm showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 11. And Would you take a look at it? And Your Honor, I will, at the end of this tendering of this exhibit, ask that the court allow me to tender a digital copy of this, as evidence. Under seal.
Okay. Yes, I've looked at State's Exhibit 11.
Does State's Exhibit 11 contain the supplemental report that you prepared outlining and detailing the investigation that you conducted up until November 13th of 2018?
It does, but as you can see, I brought a copy of my report to the stand with me anyway, and it looks like there may be a page missing from this one because my report has a page that only has about 2 sentences on it, but so this might be a page short, basically.
Your Honor, there's Sudi Child there, so please be provided a copy of the report that he.
Oh, never mind. There it is. Okay.
If it was, or
I think he's going to testify that basically from said, so we just agree to get a copy of whatever we try to do.
he would be entitled to, he would be required to update that particular as part of continuing discovery. So to the extent, Ms. Love, you have not done that, go ahead and do so, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Deputy Sprinkle, would you please clarify for the court whether or not the page you were referencing is contained within State's Exhibit 11?
It is. You just turn the page over. It turns out it was, I guess it was facing the wrong way. So no, that's my full report.
Thank you. Your Honor, the state tender State's Exhibit 11, and with the court's permission, I would like to enter evidence digitally under seal.
Okay. So Brandon,
Your Honor, I object.
And Your Honor,
basis, is this part of the order that I entered before?
No, it's not.
Why do you want to enter it under seal, madam?
only because it contains information, personal information about witnesses. The defense has been provided this report on August 8th, I believe, 2022 in its entirety. I am happy to let defense counsel look at it, review it, and compare it to their copy of the discovery that has been previously heard.
Okay.
My issue is not with under seal per se.
But then I'm going to seal it then, okay?
Well, no, it's not with that. My issue is admitting we're having a.
Well, okay. No, but you've made it an issue for the purposes of your speedy trial demand.
Right.
So they're introducing as part of what they, if I understand it, given the factors, is that what they did and the reason for the delay. Is that what you're doing, Ms. Love?
Yes.
So I mean, so that's why they're introducing it for for that limited purpose. So
With all due respect, Your Honor, he can testify to what he did.
he just did, but in terms of if the case goes up on appeal, then of course the appellate court will have an opportunity to take a look at it.
For the record, I would just like to say that there's a lot more in that report than what he's testified to through live testimony. And we are objecting to conducting this hearing through proffer, which is essentially what we're doing.
Well, you got live testimony because you haven't even examined Mr. Sprinkle yet. So you certainly will be able to do that. But I'm going to admit it and seal it over your objection, States 11. Okay, and you'll be able to get with Ms. Love and her colleagues and take a look at it. The original, the discovery that you were provided back in August, in relation to this particular document, the state will need to, of course, disclose or unless you give you that particular evidence, anything discovery they haven't done so far. Okay.
We will be able to cross-examine Mr. Sprinkle on all of the contents of that document that's being admitted as evidence. But I want to make sure we're able to do it.
If they're introducing in evidence, yeah, you get to cross them about anything you want in terms of that particular document.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Deputy Sprinkle, did your investigation into the murder of Donovan Thomas cease entirely as of November 13th, 2018?
No, it didn't.
Would you just briefly encapsulate some of the additional investigations that you participated in or conducted between 2018 and May 2021?
Okay, so in 2019, there were at least two gang-related murders that involved the YSL Street Gang and the Inglewood Family Street Gang. One was a February 23rd, 2019 murder involving a victim named Jamari Holmes and some YSL gang members named Damone Blaylock and Rodalius Ryan. I did a lot of work on that case. But for purposes of this hearing, I did a search warrant to Instagram for, I believe it was 4 or 5 accounts belonging to YSL gang members. Now, the reason why is that search warrant was for the accounts of the people that were participants in the February 23rd, 2019 murder of Jamari Holmes, of course, but with any search warrant that I did for concerning either one of those gangs, the murder of Donovan Thomas was always really just on the front of my mind, because that
Why?
it was the murder of Donovan Thomas that was essentially the primary genesis of the dispute between these two gangs that had claimed the lives of so many people and wounded countless others. So I always, when investigating any case,
Madam.
Your Honor, Deputy Sprinkle is talking about the investigation that he continued to conduct into the murder of Donovan Thomas and why it is that he did what he did during that investigation. If, again, the state's intent is at issue, Mr. Sprinkle's steps taken during the investigation are reflective of the state's intent.
Okay. I'll overrule your objection, sir.
May I respond?
What is it you want to tell me? I mean, I've overruled the objection, so what more do you want me to know?
The state just proffered evidence, and I don't think it's correct, Your Honor.
Well, then cross-examine him when you got him on cross.
I understand.
So you're a little, you know, you're a little early, okay? When you got him on cross, you can ask him these questions that you're not allowing him to answer right now. But it's relevant for the purposes of delay and the reason for delay. So can we move on from that? Okay.
In May of 2021, was the case involving the murder of Donovan Thomas turned over to a specific team in the district attorney's office and part of the broader investigation?
it was
All right, and who was it turned over to?
Don Geary was the primary attorney on the case.
And is that case, or did that case form the basis for the indictment that the defendant sits on today, charged with both the murder of Donovan Thomas and the murder of Shamel Drake?
Yes, yes, it is, because I at that point was consulting with my coworkers and recommending that we pursue an indictment on the murder case. At which point, the others just determined that a team should be assembled because this case encompassed a lot more than just the murder of Donovan Thomas. So at that point, my case file was handed, but that was the first step, was my investigation into the murder of Donovan Thomas. And then I wasn't working very closely with them. I would of course answer their questions, of which they had many when they had them, but I wasn't in a room working with them on a daily basis. But from what I understood and what would eventually see when the indictment came out, was they were working on this vast RICO case.
And are you aware of a wiretap being used to gain information in furtherance of the investigation of this RICO case that you referenced just now?
Yeah, I drafted all the documents associated with it and performed the minimization procedures and reviewed periodically would spot review the work of the modders.
And was that in April 2022?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. April 2022, I think towards the end of that month, yes.
And did the investigation that took place between the time that you were given the file by Detective Thorpe and the time that this case was initially presented to the grand jury form the basis for the indictment 22 SC 183572?
Yes.
Thank you. Just one moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
between November 2018 and May 2021, did you work with any other prosecutors on this case or on the investigation involving the murder of Donovan Thomas?
Well,
Did you at any time work with Deputy Kira Convery?
oh, yes. Deputy Kara Convery and I spoke about this case and exchanged information on a regular basis throughout the entirety of the investigation.
And where did Deputy Kira Convery work within the district attorney's office?
She was the head of the gang unit. I don't recall which year. I know Gabe Banks was the head right when the case came in. I believe you were the head of the gang unit at some point. And then Kara Convery, probably by 2019, she was the head of the gang unit.
Was there ever a time, Deputy Sprinkle, that you delayed this case to get a tactical advantage over the defendant, Shannon Stillwell?
No, I didn't want to delay the case at all.
And was this a case of average complexity?
No, this is an extremely complex case.
Just one moment, Your Honor. That's all that I have for now.
All right, Mr. Shark, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Sprinkle, how you doing today?
Very well, sir. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. As I understand it, your role in the DA's office is you receive a case file from APD.
Well, many times, most of the time actually from APD, but there are other agencies in Fulton County, of course.
And you work on that case file and bring it up, build it up for indictment if you feel that is warranted.
Correct.
Okay. But you did tell us that you are not the person who decides when to indict a case.
That's correct.
Who is that person?
Well, back in 2015, 2016,
Yes,
that would have been the District Attorney Paul Howard.
that was Mr. Howard back in 2015 and 2016. Okay. How long did Mr. Howard have that decision-making power on when Shannon Stillwell would be indicted on the 2015 case?
Well, presumably all the way up until the last day of 2020. I believe that was the last day he was in office. I could be wrong about that, but it would have definitely been around that time.
And who took over that decision-making power in 2020?
The current DA, Fonnie Willis, and her and her agents, people like myself and Adam Boddy and Pat Dutcher.
Okay. So when Miss Love asks if you delayed the indictment to get a tactical advantage on Shannon Stillwell, it wasn't even your decision, was it?
That is correct. That is correct.
That question about choosing when to indict from 2015 to 2020 should be asked of Paul Howard, correct?
I cannot.
Objection, Your Honor.
Basis.
The question about whether or not the decision to indict should have been left to Paul Howard is not proper. It does not speak to Deputy Sprinkle's actions and steps that he took during this investigation in order to make sure that it was thoroughly vetted.
They tried to create the impression that Mr. Sprinkle's the one that called the shots, and he's clearly not. And now that